Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to part two of my dad and I speaking about the Beatles and their career. I hope you enjoyed part one, and I hope you'll stick around for this episode.
He hasn't paid me for part one yet.
Yeah, I know. He has.
I've got to see what happens with part two.
No payment yet. We got to wait to see how he gets through this one, and then we'll think about giving him a little bit of.
He'll think about it, and then he'll ask me to write him a check.
Yeah, we'll give him some cookies and milk. He'll be happy, or some. What's the other thing you like there? The Chips Ahoy. He likes his Chips Ahoy.
Chips Ahoy.
All right, so let's pick it up here with another good question. Lise, and Beatle Brad and Big Boy Oz asked a similar question. They want to know, when you first saw that Ed Sullivan show and you first heard the Beatles, did you think they were a flash in the pan at that moment in time on Ed Sullivan, or did you say to yourself, these guys... they're going to have a lasting impact.
I thought they'd have an impact, but not knowing that much about their careers at that point, I thought they'd probably go back to Europe, back to England. But then they became world travelers. They never stopped traveling and playing at various venues around the world, and they were maybe more popular in places like Japan. When they went there, the people went crazy for them.
Absolutely. David Catalano, Fit to be Tie-Dyed, Paul, Big Boy Oz, and Sarah Cheney. They all want to know what your favorite, or if you can name a few Beatles songs that are your favorite, and if there's any one particular one that you feel has affected you the most, the meaning of it or whatever.
I liked, as I mentioned earlier, Till There Was You. I to this day, I've listened to that over and over.
Great cover song, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, Hard Day's Night, I couldn't get away from it from the time he was a little boy. And then I got to like George. I never really knew a lot about George, but there's a song about...
Yeah, describe it. I'll come up with it for you.
The guitar.
While my guitar gently weeps. He loves
I love that song. And anybody who plays it, doesn't have to be George or any of the Beatles. If any artist plays that song or sings, I'd listen to it over and over. And it happened later in my life, too.
Well, you said recently you heard a version of it and you stopped and listened and said, boy, that was good.
Yeah, I would just sit down, hear a song like that, and I just sit there and absorb it. I can still do that. I could sit in a chair for hours, and that's all I do these days, sit in a chair.
It's interesting, out of all the Beatles songs, they had 200, almost 300 songs, and George had only a small part of that, and yet that song that he wrote really stands out for you. I think that's great.
I didn't know he wrote it early on, honestly. I didn't know he was the one that started it off, and I just enjoy it so much.
It's funny you say that, because another great song he wrote, Frank Sinatra, said the same thing. He didn't think George wrote it. He thought it was a Lennon and McCartney, and that's the song Something.
Oh, yeah, that's a beautiful song.
That's a George Harrison song, and Sinatra was surprised.
He was, I guess, very romantic in his thoughts, as evidenced by what you hear from these songs that he wrote.
He's probably the most spiritual of all the Beatles.
Yeah,
too.
I would think so. Yeah.
Okay, let's see what we have here. We'll move on to another question. Kathy Kirk wants to know, did you ever think, and I'll set it up a little bit. For the decade of the 1960s, the Beatles had the top-selling album from that 10-year span, the Sgt. Pepper album. They're the only artists in the history of music to do it in 3 different decades. From the year 2000 to 2010, they had the number, believe it or not, 40 years after they broke up that decade, they had a compilation album called The One Album, which was the top-selling album of that whole decade from 2000 to 2010. And then it's just been announced that from 2010 to 2019, Abbey Road, being re-released and stuff, is the top-selling album of that 10-year period.
Right.
So basically it fits into this question from Kathy Kirk. Do you think after all these years, 50 years since they broke up, that they would still be this big and still be having that much of an impact in sales with the people today.
Yeah, because of their talent, the songs they wrote and their style of presentation of the songs. It seems that people will just pick it up, they'll listen for a while, and there's bound to be something in an album. It may only be one song, but they enjoy it, and they look forward to being able to scan or decide which Beatle record or records they enjoy the most. And it starts at an early age for many. Even the grandkids in our family, they enjoy listening to the Beatles, and they react. You'll notice that people react. They'll start dancing, and they want to play the guitar, they want to play the drums, and it gives them a start in being fans of music, all forms of music, which is great. I think that's important for any family, any group of people, that music can bring people together and it can improve their relationships. There's no question about it. And they contributed a lot to this. There's no question. And there's stuff going back to day one with Hard Day's Night and whatever else. It's still popular and it still sells, and people are waiting to hear it and enjoy it.
Absolutely. And it's fun. I love what you just said, because especially during these times with the coronavirus and everything, music can be so powerful and help people get through it. I know it's helping me get through it, and I know you listen to music almost every day like I do. It's a good healing factor, and it, like you said, it can get you through those tough times.
All through my life, I'm not a great music fan. Now I don't know any one note from another when I look at the song in writing, and if I have some down moments and I hear certain music, and that includes the Beatles, no question about it, it just calms me down. It's almost like a medication. It helps the way your mind works and the way your body reacts.
Absolutely. Have you ever heard, Gino wants to know if you've ever heard some of the cover versions of the Beatles songs, like there was the Holly Ridge Strings from Capitol, put out some Beatle orchestral music, and they asked about Ray Conniff. Ray Conniff has done some covers of Beatles songs. Have you ever heard some of these covers? Do you like them?
Well, I'm not saying that we've had all of Ray Conniff's music, but I always enjoyed it, as my wife did, and I bought them. Again, a lot of them I bought in Boston at the record department in Jordan Marsh, and I just love the music of Ray Conniff, maybe more so because he was from Attleboro, and we eventually lived there, and David grew up there with his brothers, and then of course Ray was honored with that bandstand being named after him.
Sure.
And a lot of people probably think that's kind of a silly thing, but
it's really good, an honor.
But it's an honor. It was an honor for him, and he did come back for the, I forget which anniversary it was. The town was like a million years old.
Centennial or bicentennial.
Yeah, and he came back and with his full group, the orchestra and the chorus, and they performed. And I thought that was great, because he had already made big time money in Hollywood. He was already known worldwide.
And you could tell he really appreciated the music of the Beatles, because if you look at a lot of his albums, he places a one or two Beatles songs on many of those albums he did in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
It's amazing how many songs he covered.
Not everybody loved his music, but he did a good job, and it appealed to many, many people.
Karen Brajak wants to know, was there anyone back in your day when you were growing up in the 40s and early 50s that you felt were kind of comparable to the Beatles, like an artist that was, top of their game before the rock and roll?
Well, of course, I didn't know what rock and roll was. When I was a kid, the big thing with the bands. I thinking about it this morning. I remember going back before my time. I think before I was born, there was an orchestra in the United States, Paul Whiteman, and he was on a radio for years, and he was a lot of the top subsequent band leaders played in his orchestra. A lot. You find that many of the bands were founded by guys who were trumpeters, sax players, or whatever in these bands, and that was it. Everybody enjoyed listening to band music, and when they went to a dance someplace, you had an orchestra there. You didn't have a trio or a quartet, and certainly not rock and roll. We didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
But these fellas for many years branched out, formed their own bands, and then they were finally overcome or run over, so to speak, by the trios and the quartets and like the Four Races, and that lasted for a number of years, through into my 20s and I think into my 30s. And when you'd go to a dance hall, they might be featured. You wouldn't have an orchestra as much as you would have a trio or a quartet performing, along with they're playing records or other music, so the people would be dancing.
Exactly.
And then eventually rock and roll came in. I remember one of the big factors was Bill Haley and the Comets.
Yeah.
And I saw them my wife and I saw them in New Jersey, down at the tip of New Jersey, Cape May.
Wow.
It was at Cape May. And we were excited. I wasn't a great fan of the band or the group, but they were good. I enjoyed
What was
music.
the atmosphere like in the hall where they played? Was
They
it
were
exciting?
a lot of dancing around and people reacting to the pace, the tempo of the music.
Yeah.
No
Do you remember if they did Rock Around the Clock or not?
Yeah, he was big time then. I think he was in a few movies, his group.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good memory of that. You saw Bill
Yeah,
Haley and the Comets. They were one of the
was
first rock and roll bands.
It was like by chance that we heard he was going to be down there, and we were up along the coast more toward Atlantic City, and we drove down one night, and he was playing in this club. It was a good-sized club, but he was there with his group.
Great. And then shortly thereafter that, rock and roll exploded with Elvis and Carl Perkins, Buddy Holly, Little Richard, Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, and
look at the influence that Elvis Presley has to this day.
And that's what influenced the Beatles. All that rock and roll from Bill Haley right through to Elvis, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry influenced artists like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. All those British bands took that as their foundation, you know. And
one thing I'll say for the Beatles, as far as my enjoying them, I never, what was the group you just mentioned?
the Stones?
The Stones. I know very little about the Stones. I enjoy some of their songs, but I never really got to find out much about them. I knew who the Beatles were, if they were married, if they were going here, going there, but some of these other groups, I knew they existed, but I never got into that. So I guess I really was taken by the Beatles quite a bit.
So I won't even ask you. I was just going to say, so for you, Beatles versus Stones, it's the Beatles.
You forget the Rolling Stones. I don't know that much about them.
Yeah. But no, I want to thank you for doing this today. It's really been great sharing some special memories about music, but more so the Beatles in these two videos. And I want to thank you all for watching these two videos with my dad, reminiscing about the Beatles and some music and whatnot. Any final words about the Beatles before we cut this off?
Well, I know they'll be here forever, their music. No matter how old I get or when I pass away, or even yourself.
Yeah,
Though, even after you're gone,
The generation's coming like the Beatles.
They'll-
My
they'll-
kids like them. My grandchildren like them.
I think the Lord. Oh yeah,
So
your boys
it's
and
going to keep going.
the grandkids,
Yeah,
and it may taper off as time passes, but I don't think they'll ever be out of the music scene. That people, there'll always be
right.
people that enjoy them and look forward to listening to their music.
Yeah, a fabulous band that will never die. One of the greatest,
Yeah.
probably musical act in the history of music.
And they were so talented.
Yeah.
It wasn't this phony baloney. Some of these groups, they knew what they were doing, and they knew how to write songs and present them. There's no question.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for doing this. Give you a hug and say thanks. Appreciate it. And
Anytime.
thank you, everybody.
I thank you for listening.
We'll be back again soon for maybe another topic. Take care. Bye-bye.